Ah, yes, debate club. Definitely not a place where so many of us had trauma. Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well because I am here to review the 4th episode of Star Trek Starfleet Academy, this one titled Vox in Excelso. Or at least I think that's how you say it, which I believe translates to Voice in Exile, which is a very appropriate title for this episode. As per usual, I will stay spoiler-free up front and then get into spoilers in the back half with a warning ahead of it, but spoiler-free. I just have to say, this is the first episode of this show that made me sit up and lean in and go, oh, this is actually great. And I am shocked to be saying that. The past few episodes of this show, I have liked, and I've been, if you've been watching my reviews of them, I have been surprised by how much Star Trek ethos I have found in these episodes that are still doing high school, college level story tropes, but putting a Star Trek twist on them. This episode, though, felt like it was still doing high school stuff, like we were dealing with basically an episode about a debate club, but putting in the context of much larger cultural conversations, specifically focusing on the character of Jaden, our Klingon character, and talking about Klingon culture, but in a way that felt like politically relevant, was doing the Star Trek thing of like talking about social and political issues through really deep metaphor, and doing so in such a, I think, a very beautiful, poetic way, and actually getting so many nuances of these ideas right. I mean, again, I've made this comparison numerous times in my reviews, but looking at Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 3 especially, where it tried to handle a lot of these topics, like race and genetics and all of these feelings of, like, conflicting feelings of people who are dealing with their own culture and their situation and their lineage, but doing so in a way that, like, doubled down on things like biological essentialism. No, this episode here in Starfleet Academy had a poeticism about it and understood the difference between, like, culture and context and people's place within culture while also being people within that culture. And it did so in such a truly beautiful way. And then on top of that, without getting too spoilery, the other thing that I really loved about this episode was that it dealt with very specifically this era of Star Trek. A lot of people have been asking, once Star Trek Discovery jumped 800 years into the future, into the 32nd century, what's going on with the races that we know from Star Trek? Like, what happened to the Klingons? What happened to the Dominion? What happened to all these people? And Discovery never really answered those questions. Here, though, we are finally touching base with the Klingons, and what I like most about it is the Klingons are not in the same exact place that they have always been. They are doing something different with the Klingons here, and I won't spoil what it is just yet, but they are in a different place entirely from where they were in the 23rd century with their sort of aggression with Starfleet, and the 24th century where they were a big empire that allied with Starfleet. Like, this is a completely different spot for them, and I really like that, and it shows me Star Trek is willing to change and be different. And that is a textual thing that this episode is talking about right up front. Like, there's a speech from Holly Hunter at the beginning of this episode that, like, ties into space and the joy of space and loving space, which I love. I love Star Trek getting, like, the joy of space, but using it as a metaphor for talking about change and growth and how things change over time.
This nebula was once a star. It could not have evolved into this present without every moment of its past. It makes me think of all of you, my cadets.
And my big issue with something like Star Trek as a franchise and something like Strange New Worlds specifically was that it was this nostalgia focus trying to capture Star Trek and Amber and just doing the hits, things that you loved from before. This episode is doing something new with Star Trek and doing it in a politically salient way, a socially relevant way, in a poetic way. It was just so good. And then on top of that, it still manages to make me feel for these characters, make these characters feel like individual people within this narrative, be funny at certain times as well, and also make me really love characters who up until this point I have really disliked. They give such heart to these characters in this episode. This shocked me. This episode may have sold me on like, if this show can keep this level up, I am sold on this show. And I am surprised. Like, I know in the comments people are going to accuse me because I'm sure I'm reviewing these before the episodes come out. I'm sure this show has gotten thrown into the Cold War bullshit like Star Wars, The Acolyte, and so many other shows. It's already started happening online. We've already started seeing people like The Critical Drinker and people like starting to target the show. So I already know, me saying this, I'm going to be called like a shill, and that frustrates me because I look at this episode and I go, wow, this actually is a really solid piece of work and captures what I love about Star Trek in a way that I haven't really seen in Star Trek for a while. I think the closest we got is like Star Trek Strange New Worlds seasons 1 and 2 had little elements of this. And even Discovery, as much as I loved it, did not manage, like it tried to do this level of poeticism and dealing with these heavy themes. Again, I love Star Trek Discovery, but it never felt like it captured a really good structure and felt like it was just always kind of a little bit messy in terms of how it tried to write some of these stories. And again, I say that as someone who loved Discovery. This episode feels like it is structurally, like it's having fun, it's enjoying itself, and yet it knows what it wants to say, and it says it really well, and it feels like a full piece of work that even something like Star Trek Discovery, which again I loved, even in its messiness, never was able to fully capture. This might have sold me on this show. And if this show can continue this, we may have something special on our hands. Like, this show may actually be something really special. I hope that this is not just a one-off and like, oh, it captured billions. Again, I haven't disliked the other episodes, but this is something, this is a step up, and I really enjoyed it. With that said, let us get into spoilers, because a lot to talk about with this one. Alright, getting into spoilers. I like that we're starting off the episode with the Athena out in space. I talked already last episode how I enjoyed last episode, but it was focused on like actiony stuff and I wanted more science nerdy stuff. Immediately here, we're getting Holly Hunter giving a speech about like space and the joy of space and relating it to growth and change. Again, themes that I want Star Trek to do. But then we jump into the Doctor leading a debate club. Again, feels very the Doctor, right? He of course would have a debate club. Again, he's just owning being a teacher, feels very the Doctor. But I like him mentioning that on Voyager, he argued himself into existence.
I won the right to be myself through argument. I debated myself into existence.
If you watch Voyager, I think that is eminently true, because unlike Data, who generally got a lot of support from people like Picard and the rest of the Enterprise D crew, the Doctor was always going up against an uphill battle of Janeway always seeing him as a hologram first, and Janeway having to learn that he's growing to be an actual person.
You wouldn't even be considering this if they were flesh and blood.
I'm not going to let you turn this into an argument about holographic rights.
Why not? That's exactly what it is.
One of my big things with debate is often, especially as a marginalized person, when you debate something, you are often having to debate your own personhood. And I like that becomes a textual conversation within this episode of Jaden having to argue for his own cultural understanding and for people to understand him. And focusing in on Jaden here, this episode capitalized so well on the unique place of his character. Because what I liked about him when I first saw him come in the first episode was that he was a Klingon who did not fit the typical idea of what we think about Klingon culture. He was a Klingon who believed in do no harm, wanted to be in medicine. And that obviously puts him as a sort of different type of Klingon. I mean, most Klingons that we've seen in Star Trek believe in being warriors and fighting in battle and violence and glory earned through violence. But Jaden, as a person who wants to study medicine, doesn't fit that. He doesn't have that bombastic style of personality, as we also see when he has his anxiety attack. Like, he is a much more introverted style of character. And yet, at the same time, we see how he still believes in the ethos of Klingon culture. Because when Caleb afterwards goes to check on him, and they have that sort of moment where they're eating food together quietly in a classroom, which I thought was very sweet, we have that moment where Jaden takes the pepperoni off of the pizza and says, I will not eat anything that didn't die honorably.
I will not eat anything that did not die in a fair fight.
It doesn't even come from a real pig.
And it's played as a joke, but it's showcasing that Jaden, despite not fitting that sort of warrior spirit that most Klingons fall into, still believes in Klingon culture. It's still part of how he was raised and what he's grown up to believe is part of, the culture that he still holds dear to himself. And it sets up a really subtle distinction with Jaden of, yes, he may not be the stereotypical warrior Klingon, yet he still grew up in Klingon culture. I also really like, by the way, as an aside, the fact that Caleb is really good at debate, that everyone was sort of cast him as like an idiot who wouldn't know how to speak up for himself, or wouldn't know a bunch of information, but the episode plays against type for his sort of roguish style character in that he is actually very smart and actually knows a lot of regulations. It again reminds me of the character of Captain Kirk, who many people think is like this bullheaded, risk is our business kind of captain, yet is repeatedly shown throughout the original series, if you actually look, to be a really book smart kind of guy.
Hey man, I remember you back at the academy. A stack of books with legs.
So again, we see Caleb being coded as a Kirk-esque style character in a very smart and subtle way. But returning to Jaden, I love his backstory. What is so good about it is you understand that Jaden is for lack of a better word, a queer person within his culture. When I say queer, and I always have to explain, I don't mean LGBTQ, I don't mean gay, I don't mean whatever. What I mean is, he is someone who is seen as outside of what the typical ideal for his culture is supposed to be. But he's still also part of his culture. And this makes him very distinct from a character like Worf, for example. Worf was a character who was Klingon, but he was raised outside of Klingon culture. And as a result, he came to somewhat fetishize it and become this like ideal, what he saw as like the Klingon ideal, like I'm the perfect warrior, I need to live up to all these tenets of honor. But then when he started to engage with actual Klingon culture, like actual people who lived in Klingon, like Gowron and Martok, even though they lived in Klingon culture, did not live up to those ideals. Gowron in specific was like a politician and did not always do the honorable thing, but did the politically salient thing as a Klingon, as we saw in Deep Space Nine, especially leading to what happened with Gowron and Worf there. But here, Jaden grew up in this culture, and while he's an outsider in it, he is also someone who grew up within it and still holds on to like, this is my culture, this is where I come from. And I like that we see with someone like Caleb does not understand this fully, mainly because Caleb is a character who grew up very skeptical of institutions and culture for very understandable reasons given how he was treated by Starfleet in particular. Like, as we get into the story here, we learn that Klingons, after the burn, are now refugees. They do not have the strong Klingon Empire anymore. And I love this because we're seeing that the Klingon Empire is in a different place. It's not just Star Trek again, like we're seeing in Strange New Worlds, like, oh, we're gonna do more Klingon stories. Like, no, this is a new place for the Klingons to be in, a new geopolitical situation for the Klingons to be in, and that's interesting. And it tells us new things about the Klingon and lets us to explore the Klingons in new ways. And I like that, Jaden, as we see through his backstory, he had a brother who supported and saw who he was, but he felt like his parents didn't. And it reminds me a lot of like Predator Badlands. If you saw that movie where you have a brother who supports his like a sort of more outsider kind of brother, but it does this in a Star Trekian way, not in the patriarch is like, I'm the man, you need to I'm going to show you how to be a real predator. Here we have a much more supportive father who wants to include Jaden, but doesn't know how to connect with him. The only negative I would have of this backstory is the very stereotypical, like, my brother's gonna die because we don't want to use Federation technology. I've seen the scene a billion times before.
The dermal regenerator is still at the market. It can save him. The tools of the Federation are not for us!
That was the only scene in this episode I'm like, that didn't hit as hard as it possibly could have. But you see the loss that Jaden has. He feels so ostracized and alone. And now he has joined into Starfleet, where he feels like he can better fit in as who he actually is, as his brother saw him. But we see Caleb doesn't really understand when he's like going to Jaden being like, oh, I'll help you in the debate, around this debate. Like, you'll obviously be arguing for Klingons to be getting help from the Federation. But Jaden being like, no, we deserve to remain Klingon. We deserve to hold on to our own culture.
Any plan for Klingon survival should be left to the Klingons.
Wait. Negative? What, you don't think the Federation's protection would help your people?
There is no protection. Not from laws. There never can be.
And what I like is that, like, if you look at something like Star Trek Discovery Season 1. In Star Trek Discovery Season 1, one of the things I liked about that season was the Klingons in that season were very against the Federation because they saw that, like, assimilationist hegemony that the Federation kind of represented them. Like, oh, they'll come and assimilate our culture. And so you had these sort of, like, very militant, fascistic kind of Klingons being like, no, we need to make Klingons great again. This idealized Klingon past that they were trying to hold on to.
Lulu, Lune, Tadur, Human Pool, Volcanan Pool, Talaran Pool, and Dorian Pu Lam Ku Ja.
Whereas Jaden here is recognizing that the Federation supports diversity and supports difference. It's not just asking everyone to assimilate and be hegemonic, but if it really is going to hold on to those ideals, it needs to understand that it needs to recognize what the Klingons are and not try to take that from them to force them to do something that the Federation wants against their will, even if it means that them dying. And it's like this importance of holding on to identity and not trying to assimilate and control it. And you know, that is a really interesting idea, because the Federation can be a colonizing force, as we've seen in other shows, where when I say colonizing, it has this sort of soft imperialism of, like, you know, forcing its culture and values onto others and making them sort of assimilate into them, as we've seen with numerous characters throughout Star Trek. And what Jaden's arguing here is like, no, the Klingons need to hold on to their own identity, and you cannot take them away from that. And he even says at one point in this episode, when he's like giving his final speech, of, you know, the Federation, it would lose a part of itself if it tried to force what the Klingons to be themselves. These are not mutually exclusive.
It is the Federation, after all.
But the Federation stops being the Federation if it insists Klingons stop being Klingons. These are not mutually exclusive. Both exist in me. I exist as both on my own terms.
Because the Federation trying to dictate what the Klingon should be would mean the Federation becomes that colonizing force that it's trying to avoid being post the burn. And I think that that's such a cool idea and such a nuanced idea that I really loved seeing here. And I loved seeing this political situation with the Klingons coming out in, like, talking about Jaden's specific interesting place as an outsider, but also someone from the culture. And that is just so nuanced that I am shocked that this show did this so well. And it is so wildly good.
Battle exists in as many forms as there are warriors, as long as it is fought in service of our people. Battle is the language we use to honor each other. It is the way we first became one. The Federation would do better to humble themselves and learn to hear our language as it is spoken.
What this episode is showing me is that this show is being very willing to critique the problems of Starfleet's past, but also trying to build up a new version of Starfleet, to question how the Federation has sometimes been a homogenizing entity that tries to force Federation values upon others. That was what Deep Space Nine as a series was very much about. I mean, that was what the whole root beer scene between Quark and Garrick was about how the Federation can force people over time to assimilate to its culture.
It's so bubbly and cloying and happy.
Just like the Federation.
But you know what's really frightening? If you drink enough of it, you begin to like it.
It's insidious.
Just like the Federation.
And here, this episode is saying, post the burn, the Federation needs to learn to accept cultures on their own terms and not try to force them to fit the Federation's values, but let them be themselves. That is a really beautiful and nuanced idea that is critical of the sort of liberal assimilationist logic that has underlined Star Trek since its beginning. And that's really, really interesting. The other elements of this that I really love is we get Darren, Remy, coming in to be the one to support Jaden. Because Caleb, you know, is trying to be a brother and support Jaden, but he's not really understanding who Jaden is. Whereas Remy is coming in and being like giving him the breathing technique and teaching him how to stand up for himself for what he wants. And I love that for Remy, because Remy's been the dick this entire time. And I like seeing like, okay, now he's actually supporting. And I knew this was going to be the arc for him, but I'm like that we're getting it sooner. And I like that we're getting these shades of like Remy being a supportive person, showing actually like he may be a jerk, but he still has those Starfleet values and knows how to support people in a way that Caleb can't. It endeared me to Remy so much to see that. But the other piece of this that I loved was we get Thought. She comes in and speaks to Jaden and says, I should have talked to you as your Klingon elder.
I do not want to F it up, as Commander Reno says, but I regret not trusting my own instincts and speaking to you. Not as your Starfleet instructor, but as your Klingon elder.
And what I love about this is that it reminds us that while she is Jem'Hadar ancestry and Klingon ancestry, she is not half. She is not half Klingon. She is not less of a Klingon. She is just as much a Klingon as she is a Jem'Hadar, despite her being biracial. That is something that other Star Trek shows, looking at you, Strange New Worlds, could learn. That when you are dealing with a biracial character, yes, they are going to, like Spock, for example, have these ties between, like, should I acquiesce to more to human culture, more to Vulcan culture? Like, there are these conversations they have, but they are not half one thing and half the other. They are fully both. This episode of Starfleet Academy further emphasizes why the Strange New World Season 3, Episode 4.5 Vulcans was so bad. Because that was an episode that did not understand the distinction between culture and a biracial character who is wrestling with dual cultural heritage and biology, and mistaking culture for biology. That episode repeatedly doubled down on saying that Spock was somehow less of a Vulcan because he was biracial.
Spock is only half Vulcan, whereas the four of us
are fully Vulcan.
Is that not logical?
Spock.
When in actuality, Spock was the only character on the Enterprise who was Vulcan in any meaningful sense, even despite the fact that the Enterprise crew had become quote-unquote fully genetically Vulcan, because Spock was actually raised in Vulcan culture. And we get that acknowledged here with Thought as a Jem'Hadar and Klingon biracial woman, because she is no less Klingon because she is biracial. In fact, she is just as much Klingon as any other quote-unquote fully biological Klingon. That does not mean she does not wrestle with issues stemming from her biracial identity or is ostracized from Klingon culture because she's biracial, and I'm sure we'll explore elements of that in her character later on in the series. But right here, right now, the show is saying that she is just as much a Klingon, even though she is also biracial. And I loved seeing that. And I loved her reframing Jaden's experience with his father, because he felt like his father never saw him. And again, I get such queer vibes. And again, this is why I always use queer as a term to mean people who are outsiders within a culture, even though they are part of the culture. Everyone sort of thinks of queer as like LGBTQ, and that it can mean that, obviously. But queer to me is like someone who is like part of a culture but yet outside of it, and he feels like he is not seen.
I do not know what Klingon I am, or what Starfleet officer. I dishonored both worlds. The last day with my house, my father and I went hunting together.
Queer people often don't feel seen. Trans people, LGBTQ people, we obviously feel that a lot, like people don't see us. But the same thing here with him. He is feeling like he's not seen by his own dad. And his dad doesn't know how to express that. And I like that this isn't just a dad like in Predator Badlands who's like, no, you need to live up to Klingon culture. But what Thought explains to him is like, your dad didn't know how to express that. And so Klingons would not have missed that kill shot. And he realized you were never going to be the warrior he wanted you to be, the type of person that you wanted to be, and he set you free to let you fly and did not kill you.
I believe your father honored the hunt the only way he knew how, by recognizing your victory and setting you free so that you could fly.
And it may not have been in the best, most supportive way. There could have been better ways for his father to have done that if he had been more emotionally open to being able to say that, and should have said that to Jaden. And I hope that gets to be, there's certainly, there's going to be more stories with Jaden down the line, so I hope that comes up down the line. But I like that is a open conversation that we have here with, like, your dad did see you. He didn't know how to express it, didn't understand you, but was trying and set you free to come here. And that still has harm to Jaden because his dad wasn't able to be openly supportive, but it was a different reframing. And I really loved that. And what I ultimately love is it showcases, again, stories that I love, which is people who are queer, outsiders to culture, are the ones that make the culture, that can actually direct culture and be the ones to move culture in a really interesting way. Because we also get this other side storyline with Holly Hunter having to try and negotiate with the Klingons to get them to accept this this planet that can like be their refugee home. And the Klingons not wanting to accept it because they don't want to accept charity from the Federation. And so she meets with Obel, the Klingon ambassador. They meet in down low. And I love the sexual tension we see between these two. Like, there's so clear tension between Holly Hunter and Obel.
Catch up properly or straight to business?
Business. Catching up properly can only complicate.
Like, they definitely fucked in the past. But I love, again, he's like, I get it. I understand what you're trying to do, but we cannot accept it. No one will accept it because that's not who Klingons are. And it's like, even he understands, like, I would accept it. I get it. I want to, but it's just not, there's so much cultural baggage that I'm fighting against here that it just would not work.
I would have dishonored my people to spare them. Now, we have nothing left but our traditions.
Is there room to expand tradition?
And I love that Jaden is the one to come up with this plan of, like, if you force a conflict and let them hold on to their identity and have this like kind of faux battle, you can get them to do what you want, but they won't feel like they've lost a piece of their culture. And I love when they show up with Holly Hunter to the planet and like Holly Hunter like forces a conflict, like, hey, you're supposed to, you know, this is our land, get out of here, sort of thing. And you see Obel sort of like kind of smirk, being like, oh, I get it. I get what you're doing. And even acknowledges that with Jaden later on by giving him the bow and being like, you are a true warrior. Like, you may not do it in the same way, but you are a warrior. And we see you as a Klingon. I thought was so beautiful. And then the end of the episode where Caleb and Jaden sort of bond again, and they shows they are brothers. And I love Jaden saying, like, I thought, like, I couldn't accept you because I had to hold on to this loss of my brother. And I love this idea. It says, like, you know, let the past inform the now, essentially, is what he says.
Maybe the trick is not to let go of the past, but to let the present in.
And I love that idea because so much when we talk about, like, you know, different things, a lot of people say, like, oh, let the past die. It's like, no, we shouldn't let the past die. Nor should we seek to build a nostalgic past of, like, holding on to the past, like fascists want, like, make America great again, right? Like, we shouldn't want to build a nostalgic past, but neither should we erase the past. We need to understand what our scars are, look at our scars, but use them as a way to inform our future and look towards the future, but understanding what our scars are. Hopefully letting our scars heal, but reminding ourselves that they are scars. And that was something that Deep Space Nine was always about too, right? Like, that's my favorite Star Trek show for that exact reason, is it's a Star Trek show that's saying, like, no, we're not going to be like, everything's great and perfect. Like, we hold scars on our body. We're not going to say, like, there's no history here, there's no context here. That was something like Sisko as a black man, a black character, was always talking about, right? We even pointing out, like, you know, we can't forget, like, the history of, you know, black people treated in America. Even if we understand that that's not how black people are treated now, we still remember that.
You really want to know what my problem is? I'll tell you. Las Vegas, 1962, that's my problem. In 1962, black people weren't very welcome there. Oh, sure, they could be performers or janitors, but customers never.
Maybe that's the way it was in the real Vegas, but that is not the way it is at Vic's. I have never felt uncomfortable there, and neither has Jake.
But don't you see, that's the lie. In 1962, the civil rights movement was still in its infancy. It wasn't an easy time for our people, and I'm not going to pretend that it was.
Holding those scars to, like, build a better future. And I like that that comes up textually with him, and he's being like, I shouldn't let my loss with my brother define me and cut me off from connection, but I also need to hold it in my heart as an important thing.
You two are alike.
I did not think both of you could live in my heart. I believed I had to let him go.
And I can bring you and Caleb to this, and these aren't at conflict with each other, but it's something that I needed to work through. And I really thought that that was a very beautiful idea, and that ending brought me to tears in a really, really wonderful way. As you can clearly tell from my talking about this episode, this was really, really good. And I've said this before, but I really hope that people see this episode and see it for what it is. I am so worried for this show, and we'll see how this goes into next episode, but, like, I think this show has something special. And I worry because of all the baggage around Star Trek as a franchise right now, the Skydance of it all, the like rough last few years for Star Trek in Strange New Worlds and Section 31, and you know the let's put it mildly and say the divisive nature of something like Discovery and Picard, to put it mildly. And also the culture war bullshit this show is going to be going through, because it does have diverse and queer characters in it, and it's going to get bad faith attacks. Like, I think this show has something. And hopefully it can continue. Maybe it'll fall flat on its face, but this episode was really good. What did you think, though? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down below. Beyond all of that, let me know, and I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.